It's Technicians Tuesday. Merry Christmas, everybody. Today we want to show you what we look for when we are inspecting a used boat. This week's contest prize is going to be a foot cush deck mat, so click that subscribe button and get the bell on so we can begin the boat inspection. There are about 7 or 8 specific things that we want to look at when inspecting a boat. The first thing we'll do is just do a visual inspection of the outside of the hull of the boat. We want to inspect the rub rail for signs of impact, looking at the hull itself for damage like signs of impact or major stress cracks from lots of use. Looking at the bottom of the hull for signs of a hard grounding or patchworks from a previous grounding event. Basically, just walk over the entire outside and underside of the boat, looking at the electronics transducer, the drain plug, and the through-hole fittings for any kind of damage or potential problem areas. Before moving to the inside, we also want to check the strength of the transom if this is an older boat. This is pretty simple. Just begin slowly applying pressure to the engine by pressing on the anti-ventilation plate. We can shake the motor up and down, watching the transom to see if there is any kind of flex that would clearly be an up and coming issue. As long as that's all good, we can move to the inside of the boat to continue with a visual inspection of the inside of the boat. On the inside, we are going to continue to look for damaged fiberglass, soft decks, take a look into the fuel tank access and see what the tank looks like, look over the floor where the T-top screws down to. Sometimes cracks will develop here or the T-top screws might start to come out. We just want to look over all of these things and make sure they are secure. Give a little yank on the T-top, the bow rail, and the leaning post. These are the things that we hold on to when underway, so it's best to make sure they are solid before we own the boat. Anything else that you see in your visual inspection is going to be your personal preference and your budget. How does the upholstery look? What's the canvas look like? Make sure these things aren't going to fall apart after you buy the boat. If they look like you are going to be working on them in the near future, take that into account when thinking about the price of the boat. We'll go ahead and move on to looking into the electronics of the boat, including the GPS or chart plotter, the radio, the VHF.
Yesterday's high temperature was 77 degrees and the low 69.
And any other things that are on the boat. See what works and what doesn't. Make sure you have a pad of paper and a pen or pencil to write all of this stuff down as well. Keeping track of this will be useful when you are negotiating. Another thing we are looking at are all of the lights and the pumps. Go through every single switch and turn it on, making sure all of the lights work, the most important being the navigation light and the anchor light. Then when checking the pumps, make sure they turn on, but also look around to make sure that they aren't leaking at any of the hoses anywhere. Once you have gone through all of the switches, you'll want to inspect the bilge area. The biggest thing here is that you check that the automatic bilge float switch is hooked up and working properly. Turn the battery switch off and then flip the float switch up to ensure that it turns on the bilge pump. This is something that you don't want to find out that it doesn't work when you needed it to work. While looking into the bilge, it's also a great time to look at the wiring and what the condition of it is. We're looking to make sure that proper marine heat shrink connectors have been used. If you start to see home electrical connectors like wire nuts or really green and corroded wiring, take note that someone will be working on this wire in the near future, and if you want it to be you or not. These are places for failure and hassle, so it's important to inspect the wiring that is around the boat to make sure it is clean and appears to have been installed correctly. If we see that all of the wires are just hanging around, you'll probably end up going through that mess to figure out how to make all the lights and pumps operate when you want them to. If you see that most of the wires and connectors have what is called tension relief close to the connection, this is a good sign that the wiring has been installed properly and that someone hasn't been in there messing with it. Take a look at the batteries while doing the inspection of the wiring and bilge. Look around them for a date code, usually a letter and a number. Most of the time the letter corresponds with a month, like A for January, B for February, C for March, and so on. Then the number is going to let you know the year that the battery was manufactured, like a 7 would be for 2017 depending on the current year. Batteries generally only last 2 to 4 years, and if you can get more than 4 out of them, then those batteries have done you great service. By this point in time, we have been almost all the way through the boat, and if there is something that isn't up to par, we should have been able to sniff it out by now. The next thing we want to take a look at, if this applies to you, is that trailer. A lot of times we forget to inspect the trailer and then have to deal with it not too far down the road. Your main points on the trailer are the axles. Look at them to see for any kinds of major rusting where it looks like they are about to snap. Then look at the backs of the hub and the brakes. Usually right there at the end of the axles they begin to rust, and then it becomes a replacement of the major components of the trailer. Look at the leaf springs to see what kind of condition they are in. Also look at the U-bolts to see what they look like too. Walk around and look at all of the tires for dry rot or splitting. See what kind of tread is left on them as well. Test the lights and see if they are functioning properly. It's all of these little things that can add up later on after you buy the boat that can help you to negotiate and keep yourself from getting stuck in a project situation you really didn't want to be in. But now that we have been through most of the boat, we've still got to take a look at the more expensive section of the vessel, being the engine. There are only a couple of tests that we really need to perform here. We'll start by doing a visual inspection just like we did with the boat. We can take the cowling off and visually inspect it for cleanliness, looking at the fuel filters, oil filter on 4-strokes, and looking for signs of regular service. I'll put a link up top to our hours video so you can learn more about service and how to get more hours out of your engine. We also want to inspect the boat's fuel filter as well, looking for signs of rust, whether it is newer or older. Sometimes even finding dates that have been written on these filters telling when it was last changed. We'll look at the propeller and the skeg, looking for signs of grounding, maybe hitting something, dings in the prop, and all around visual damage. Once we've done the visual, we can check the gear case to see if there is water in it or what the condition of the gear lube is. We'll just crack open the lower drain screw and allow just a small amount of lube out. If there is water in the lower unit, there will be either milky gear lube or straight water that slips out of the gear case. After learning about the lower unit condition, we can take a look at the integrity of the engine. We'll do that by checking spark and compression. Before we do that though, you'll want to make sure you are subscribed to the channel, follow us on Instagram, and drop a comment below with the hashtag FootCush to be eligible to win this week's contest. You will need a spark tester, a compression gauge, and either someone to turn the key for you or a remote starter button. Locate the spark plugs on the back of the engine by removing any shrouds or plastic that might be covering them, and then pull the ignition coil wires off or pulling out the ignition coils themselves. Then we can remove the spark plugs, looking at them when we take them out to get an idea of their age. I can't tell you how many times we've looked at an engine with a running problem and the only problem was just worn out spark plugs. If they look burnt and discolored where the tips look like they are deteriorating or like they seem to have been eaten away, then it's time to change them, but for our inspection, at least we know what they look like now. We'll install our compression tester. If using the key switch on the boat, we'll want to hook up the spark tester to the ignition coils and pull the kill switch to make sure the coils don't fire, risking causing a fire. Now we'll just check each cylinder to see what the compression is, and we'll be looking for at least 150 to 160 pounds for 4 strokes and over 100 pounds for 2 strokes. Also make sure that one cylinder is not way different from another. You don't want to see one cylinder at 150 pounds and another at 190. If the engine hasn't ran in a long time and has been sitting, you can start the engine and let it warm up a little bit to get the exact results. Otherwise, you shouldn't see this difference if the engine is in good health. The oil pumps build oil pressure in only a few revolutions of the engine, so the piston rings will get some oil on them pretty quickly, giving us some pretty good numbers. We can check to see if all of the cylinders are sparking, and as long as we don't see anything wrong here, it's time to put everything back together, check the hours that are on the engine, and put the boat in the water for a sea trial. Unless there are analog gauges on the boat, you can look at the tachometer to find out how many hours are on the engine. Otherwise, you will need to hook it up to a laptop with the software to read the engine's computer for the hours. Putting the boat in the water is a smart thing to do because it allows us to see if there are any leaks or issues. With the boat in the water, we can look in the bilge for streaming or flowing water. If you let the boat sit for a few minutes and without anyone walking around the boat moving it around in the water, you shouldn't see water flowing from anywhere. If you do, then most likely there is a leak that will need to be addressed. It's also important to do the sea trial just because you want to make sure that you like the way that the boat handles and that you like the ride. Some boats can track hard to one side, list, ride bow down plowing through the water, be underpowered from the engine, splash a lot of water into the boat, or just porpoise really hard. If you aren't familiar with the ride of that style and brand of boat, it's usually a good idea to make sure it rides the way you want it to before forking out the cash and buying something you don't like. We thank you for hanging out with us this week and look forward to seeing you next Tuesday.